Hey, vinyl community and all my music loving friends, it's MGK Boston. That's Mike back with another video. Just thought today I'd switch things up as far as the subject goes. I don't see a lot of people talking about movie soundtracks, so I thought I'd couple my lifelong love for cinema with the music stuff. So I'd showcase a dozen or so movie soundtracks today, just for something different to talk about. So just an alert for all any vinyl purists out there. I am going to show a couple of compact discs, so if that bothers you, you'll have to change the channel. But for me, it's all about the music, as I've said in videos before. And I will, as I say, call these hybrid videos where I'm showing both vinyl and compact discs, neither here nor there. But anyway, without further ado, let's start jumping through this. Like I said, I'm going to show a dozen or so today. So I'm going to kick off with this Canadian classic, produced by the great Ivan Reitman, and featuring voices of John Candy's on this, Eugene Levy, among others from the SCTV group. But Heavy Metal was I believe it was a collection of short, this before anime was a thing. This was the release date on this around 1981. 1981. And it was released on Elektra, the Elektra record label, this soundtrack. So it's just a bunch of weird cartoons, a lot of drug references. You kind of have to be high when you watch this. It's one of those, it's pretty far out. I saw this when I was in university in the late 80s in Ottawa at a repertory cinema. It was a double bill with this and The Wall. So kind of heavy on the brain that night. But I do remember sort of. But this is, the soundtrack features a lot of people, pretty big names at the time. Of course, Sammy Hagar with the track Heavy Metal, title track on this. Don Felder from the Eagles is on this. He does Heavy Metal Taking a Ride. You've probably heard that. It's kind of a staple on classic rock FM. Blue Oyster Cult's on this. Donald Fagen, of course, from Steely Dan. There's a Nazareth song on here, Crazy. All these songs were pretty much songs that weren't on these bands' records, with the exception here of Journey. Open Arms is on here. You can see it right there. But yeah, Heavy Metal. It's like kind of a cartoon film, like I said. Release date on that one, 1981. I believe it was all produced and made in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. Ivan Reitman was a big producer from Toronto back in the day. I believe he's still around. Movie producer, that is. Switching gears here completely. The late, great Stanley Kubrick, the director of this one. It's Full Metal Jacket. Release date on this one was 1987. I saw this in the theater when it came out. The film, if you're not aware, there were a lot of Vietnam movies like Hamburger Hill, Platoon, etc. being made around the mid-'80s. And so this was Kubrick's contribution to the whole Vietnam movie genre, if you will. The reason I really love the film, the first half basically does what all the other movies didn't. It shows what these guys went through just in training, just to become, this is focused on the Marine Corps, I should point out, branch of service. So it takes place in Paris Island. However, Kubrick was a little eccentric in that he liked to film most of his films in England. And so he built these elaborate sound stages. So, unlike Apocalypse Now, a movie like that, the Francis Ford Coppola film that was filmed in the Philippines, it took over 2 years to make. Kubrick, again, it looks like Paris Island, which is on the East Coast in the United States. That's a Marine base. There's Camp Pendleton in the Southwest and Paris Island on the East Coast where the Marines trained to become Marines. And a work colleague of mine was in the Marine Corps and trained at Paris Island in the early 80s. And he's told me the scenes here, of course, there's R. Lee Ermey right there playing the drill sergeant. And Vincent D'Onofrio, of course, playing Private Pyle. There's a young Matthew Modine right there. He was a platoon leader, I believe, in the film. I haven't seen this in a long time. But as I said, back to my work colleague, Steve, who does watch these videos, he'll get a kick out of this. He had a drill sergeant that was not a far cry from the R. Lee Ermey. He said this was very factual. The training they go through is rigorous, but it's how you get to become a Marine. Anyway, on that note, I've kind of told you the plot of the film, and then the second half of the film, of course, takes place. They're deployed and they're in Vietnam. So back to the music on this. Wooly Bully, that was a bubblegum hit in the 60s. Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. These boots are made for walking. There's Nancy Sinatra. And the score itself, side 2, is all film score. That was actually done, this is a pseudonym, it's Abigail Mead. That's actually Stanley Kubrick's daughter. Her real name is Vivian Kubrick, but she always worked under the pseudonym Abigail Mead. She did stuff for the BBC, you know, for different film documentaries and stuff like that. With a musician, multi-instrumentalist, and she did film scores. And of course, she did score for the score for Full Metal Jacket. So again, 1987. It's Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, him being the director, of course. So, speaking of the 60s, I'll keep this in the sleeve, I guess. This is Easy Rider, directed and starring the late, great Dennis Hopper. He's unmistakable. He played the character Wyatt, and of course, Peter Fonda, his sidekick in the movie, driving Captain America motorcycle, is played Billy, and that was Peter Fonda. So, you can see there they are on the back. Real road trip movie. There's sex, smuggling, motorcycles, guns. What else do you need, right? So there they are on the back. There's a young, handsome Peter Fonda. There's Jack Nicholson was in the movie too. And there's Dennis and some young lady chatting it up right there. He's got the whole hippie look going on. Great movie, great soundtrack, as you can see here. Steppenwolf kicking it off with The Pusher, and it also includes the Steppenwolf song. Of course, there's Born to Be Wild. Don't know who this is. Someone called Smith doing The Wait, which is a band song. It's a cover. Yeah, and the Ballad of Easy Rider, featuring Roger McGuinn. Of course, Roger McGuinn, guitarist for the Byrds. So, yeah, Easy Rider, release date on this one, 1972. It's a timeless movie. I actually saw this at that same cinema back when I was in university. There was a repertory cinema, and of course, the rep cinemas would always show different movies every night, and you could get the monthly calendar and go and see older films on the big screen, which was always cool, and it was a good way for me to discover some of these older films. You know, of course, being around 20 years old in 1987, this was a generation behind me. So there it is, Easy Rider, featuring Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper. Check it out, definitely worth seeing. Because I'm going to recommend music throughout this video, but also most of these movies are really excellent. So speaking of excellent and good times, this is a promo for the Animal House soundtrack. I'll spit that out. Of course, National Lampoon was the magazine, and they put out some great movies in the 70s, and this was no exception. Of course, featuring John Belushi. There he is at the top of the Delta House. So it's just a weird shaped CD, as you can see. It's just a weird shape, and there's a warning on it not to play it in change your CD, play it only in a single, because I imagine this thing would get all jacked up. Yeah, do not play in dashboard or multi-CD players. Yeah, or jukebox type CD players rather. But this is pretty cool, and you can see, I hope the light's not reflecting. You can see there's just the cartoon of the whole cast here. Wild movie. If you've been living under a rock and never heard of it, definitely check it out. If you like comedy, it's timeless. It takes place in the late 50s, and it's just all about Greek life in college in the United States and the wild times that ensued. There it is. Animal House. Moving ahead, this is 1985, 86. What is the release date on this one? Yeah, 1984, actually. Directed by Penelope Spheris. This is called Suburbia. Takes place, I believe, just outside of Los Angeles, Long Beach area, I think. Some of the people in this of note, you can't see. There he is right there. There's Flea, the guy there with the top hat from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He was actually in this. And of course, you can see here, it's original soundtrack recording featuring the music of TSOL. They were a band from Orange County, California. TSOL stood for True Sounds of Liberty. Great band. DI is another one on this. And of course, another one from Orange County, the Vandals. You can see there's some photos and it lists the bands, and there's pictures of the bands on the back here. This guy, Alex Gibson, was a guitar player, and he does the film score. Basically, if you had the record album, and a buddy of mine had the record at the time, I believe side 2 was all the instrumental stuff, and it's really good. Guy named Alex Gibson. And then on the inside here, just some more photos of the bands and some of the movie. This is a little kid that was in the movie, a little punker with the mohawk. And there you can see there's Suburbia. Great film, probably hard to find. But like most things online, you can find and rent a lot of these films. Amazon's always a good place to start. Amazon Prime, if you have that, and YouTube, of course. So again, that was Suburbia, 1984. Penelope Spheris, the director of that film, she did another trilogy, actually, that's a documentary, really worth seeing. It's called The Decline of Western Civilization. One of the films was on heavy metal, and the other one was on punk rock, and I forget what the third one was about. I only saw the first two, and again, there was one focused on punk and one focused on heavy metal, and both were done. I want to say they were done in the late 80s into the early 90s, but really good documentary filmmaker as well as making regular movies she did. I'm trying to think of the big Hollywood blockbuster she did in the 90s, but it just escapes me. She did have a big breakthrough commercial success later on, but again, I'm thinking about it, and I can think about it all day, and it's not coming to me. Anyway, Penelope Spheris was the director on that one. This is the German version of the Risky Business soundtrack. Of course, release date on this film was 1984, I want to say, 83. No, 84. Yeah, it was on Virgin. There's Tom Cruise dancing by himself in the living room. So this is the German version. I might have showed this in a previous video. I don't know in what context. For some reason, I think I've shown this before. Of course, some of the highlights on this, of course, you've heard it a million times, Old Time Rock and Roll. It's Bob Seger. In the Air Tonight, Phil Collins. There's a good Jeff Beck instrumental on here, and it's called The Pump. Kicks off side 2. Of course, this also features all the instrumental stuff from Tangerine Dream. They were German. You've probably heard of them before, kind of in the same vein as a Brian Eno. Instrumentalists, also from Germany. Don't know if the Tangerine Dream stuff was included on the American pressing of this, because this is the German import. Of course, there's a cartoonish version of the beautiful Rebecca De Mornay, who was also in this film. Great movie, totally representative of the mid-'80s of the time. I lived it. I was in high school. It's accurate. Never went to a party as good as the one that Tom Cruise throws in this movie, but regardless, some good times were had by myself at that time. And again, the release date on this one's 84. Seen it a dozen times at least. It's one of my favorite movies. Takes me back, 1984, Risky Business. Here's another one from the period. Always thought it was directed by John Hughes. John Hughes, also famous for The Breakfast Club and other movies, relative to the teen angst experience. But Some Kind of Wonderful, he was the writer, not the director. Director on this one is a guy named Howard Deutsch. And this features a bunch of alternative new wave stuff that was pretty big at the time, if you were into that. Of course, Brilliant Minds, an excellent track by a band called Furniture. I Go Crazy, Flesh for Lulu, they were another big one around the period. Jesus and Mary Chain, Hardest Walk, I think that was from their first album, actually. There's another one here, Miss Amanda Jones, that by the March Violets. Total departure for those guys. They were kind of like a gothic, like kind of in the same vein as Sisters of Mercy. I have some March Violet stuff in my collection, and this doesn't sound like that other original stuff. But anyway, it's still a good single. And yeah, that's about it. So again, this featured a young Eric Stoltz. There he is right there. Leah Thompson. And Mary Stuart Masterson was the other gal in it. Yeah, it's a really good story. There it is. It's Some Kind of Wonderful. There it is. And John Hughes was the producer too, as it turns out. Writer and producer for that film, Some Kind of Wonderful. Excellent. Highly recommended. If you lived in the 80s, you dig that movie. Got to check it out. All right, so shifting gears totally to serious music, a serious drama, that is. This is Hillary and Jackie, featuring Rachel Griffiths and Emily Watson are the two stars that play the two sisters. Of course, Emily Watson plays Jacqueline Dupre, and Rachel Griffiths plays Hillary Dupre, her sister. Both cellists. Of course, Jacqueline Dupre was the more talented of the two, had an extremely successful career from kind of 1960-61 onward. Later married Daniel Barenboim. Daniel Barenboim, born in Israel but lived in various places, concert pianist in his own right and a world-class conductor, symphony conductor that is. And he, of course, would collaborate with Jacqueline Dupre, Jackie Dupre as she was commonly known, and at the time, and he would conduct the symphony. Of course, she would be up front with her cello. I was looking at a couple of old clips last night on YouTube, really remarkable. At the time this film came out, I want to say this was around 1998. Yeah, actually, there was those books, you remember, Cooking for Dummies, Jazz for Dummies. So I bought a classical music for dummies. I think I made it through the first chapter at the time because I really loved this film. And there was another movie right around the period called The Red Violin. Had a lot of classical music in it too. And there's just so much to figure out and discover. I'm going to get that book out of the storage in the basement maybe today. I know where it is, and dig a little deeper because I actually listened to this through, and it actually contains the concerto for Elgar that Jacqueline du Pré was extremely famous for. Yeah, in its entirety. There it is right there, all 4 parts. Adagio 1, Moderato. I'm mispronouncing all of these things. I'm not doing it justice. And then the film score itself was done by someone by the name of Barrington Fillong. I'm probably not saying that either, but this was on Sony, on their classical division. Hilary and Jackie, highly recommended. Great film. It's sad. It has a very sad ending because by 1971, Jacqueline du Pré had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and she failed quickly. She lived with the disease for quite a while. I think she didn't pass until into the 80s, and she had divorced Daniel Barenboim at that point. Of course, her career ended. She couldn't play anymore as the MS got more severe. So she really had kind of a 10-year window there from 1961 onward. And her and Barenboim were very famous in the classical music world. And it's kind of wild in this movie. You know, we've all watched movies that feature on rock musicians. You've seen movies about jazz and blues people, but never really seen a movie about classical musicians. So it's kind of interesting to see the culture. It's not different behind the scenes, the drama that you have, you know, with some bands and, you know, Van Halen, they only wanted a certain color of M&Ms. There's a bit of the drama too, even with the classical classical musicians, I'll say that correctly. But yeah, Hilary and Jackie, great film. Check it out. Release date on that, 1998. And I just thought I'd show this as a side thing, as I do if I have a sidebar that's interesting relative to the subject. Of course, here's an album right here with Daniel Barenboim, so you could see there. This is what they really look like. Of course, this is them. This is Daniel Barenboim, and this is Jacqueline du Pré. And the release date on this, I believe, this is 1967. So yeah, as the back, there's a whole story about them here. They were married in 1967. It says, Mr. and Mrs. Barenboim take great delight in concertizing together, much to the mutual pleasure of their audiences on both sides of the Atlantic. The music making on the part of this very energetic, enormously gifted duo has led the New York Times to state 2 more equally talented young musicians would be hard to find on stage today, or 2 whose appreciative ideas dovetail more closely. So that's a pretty accurate description. They just were a dynamic, perfect team, if you will. Him as the conductor and she as the player. But you could actually look up Daniel Barenboim too. I would recommend Friedrich Chopin's Nocturnes. He's done it several times, and there's several versions on YouTube. So if you want to see him playing the piano, he's amazing. So yeah, again, this is I only have a small section of my stuff of classical music, and this is in my collection. So again, Jacqueline du Pré with Daniel Barenboim and the New York. He was conducting the New York Philharmonic Orchestra at the time. So yeah, and they're doing Schumann's cello concerto in A minor, operato 129. Yeah, pretty cool. All right, totally shifting gears from classical music. All right. Matthew McConaughey says several times in this movie, it's Dazed and Confused. Release date on this one, 1993. This was a big starter movie for a lot of careers. Ben Affleck was in this. Parker Posey was in this. Of course, like I said, Matthew McConaughey. This was his first breakthrough film, if you will. It was an independent directed by a guy that was pretty popular, a director in the 90s. Richard Linklater's his name. He went on to do some bigger films, but this is a pretty cult classic. Basically just tells the story, a day in the life of a bunch of small town kids in Texas in summer, going into the summer of 1976. They're all graduating from their senior year of high school, and just it's a day in the life. And, you know, looking back on this movie, I haven't watched it in several years, but I remember thinking at the time, I graduated from high school in 1987, 11 years after this was supposedly to take place in 76. And high school's high school, it doesn't really matter the decade, and the good times if you enjoyed that time in your life, which I did. This movie, great soundtrack, Rick Derringer, Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, of course Foghat, I've mentioned them in some of my other videos. Of course Slow Ride is probably their biggest song ever. War, Lowriders on this. Great party soundtrack, and this soundtrack I've actually used to play it partying with friends back in the day, around the time when this came out again in 1993, and it's called Dazed and Confused, directed by Richard Linklater. Great movie. If you've never seen it, it's a great fun party movie. Look it up. You will not be disappointed. Another great MGK recommendation, if I do say so myself. And there I said it. So, as I've also said before, I've been collecting off and on since I was probably grade 5 when I got my first Kiss album. This is something I got when I was a child as well, and this is still my original copy. There's John Travolta down in front, and the brothers Gibb, Robin, Maurice, and Barry in the center. This is the original soundtrack, of course, for Saturday Night Fever. It's the story of Tony Manero, worked in the paint department in a hardware store by day and danced his ass off in a Brooklyn disco at night. Of course, this came out in 77. You can see the promo on the front. It's featuring original hits by Casey and the Sunshine Band, Kool and the Gang. You got the Tramps on here. Yeah, Von Lemon, I Can't Have You. So yeah, there's the back. You can see there it is. Yeah, there's Tavares was another band on this. Pure disco. If you don't like disco, avoid this. Take a right turn. Do not pass go. It's a disco hallmark. But again, it's been selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry, this movie. So it can't be all bad. Great gatefold sleeve. This is still in really good condition. There's Travolta. The dance sequences in the movie are really awesome, even if you don't like disco. My daughter is big into musical theater, and so yeah, I can appreciate all the work that goes into rehearsing and figuring out dance routines and choreography. And yeah, Travolta's really awesome in this. Yeah, lots of cool photos here. It just screams 1977. Look at that suit. So of course they were on this is the Robert Stigwood label. Of course, there you go. It's RSO right there. That was the logo. Home to many disco artists at the time. Of course, now long defunct. I don't know who bought the Robert Stigwood catalog. If he was a British guy or if he was a stray, and I can't recall. But yeah, again, if you don't like disco, avoid the music. However, it is a great movie, and I've seen it more than once, and I'll probably see it again in this lifetime. I really like it. And I like John Travolta as an actor. So yeah, this was good. He was a young guy at the time, not long after his sitcom days on Welcome Back, Kotter, in fact, when he made this movie. So again, Saturday Night Fever. That's a double album. I should make note of that as well. So something totally different. I've never actually seen this movie. It's the only one on this list of films that I haven't seen. I bought this at the time just because I liked a lot of the artists. It's a film called Salvation. This came out 1987. It was made in New York City, I believe mentioning Brooklyn, director by a woman just simply called herself Beth B. Kind of in the same school, if you're familiar with John Waters movies, really real quirky, bizarre, not really my cup of tea. I don't know if I'd seek it out. It's supposed to be about a televangelist, which televangelists were really a big thing before the internet. I don't know if they are these days. I'm not a really religious guy, but it was a satire on televangelism, and it was called Salvation with the exclamation mark. Again, I bought it mostly. It was cheap, like a promo at the time when it came out. You could see some of the bands on here, of course. New Order, there was a song on here, Touched by the Hand of God. Heard it on alternative radio at the time. It wasn't on any New Order albums, and I'm a big New Order fan. Not a completist by any stretch, but I have a lot of New Order stuff. There's another one on here called Let's Go by New Order. There's Cabaret Voltaire, have 2 songs on this. There's one called Twanky Party, Cabaret Voltaire. If you don't know them, you should look them up. Kind of a industrial dance. I don't know how I describe them. Not Skinny Puppy industrial, but still really quite different at the time. Again, Cabaret Voltaire. Yeah, and they do an instrumental on here called Jesus Saves, Cabaret Voltaire. Again, that movie, Again, the only one on this list I haven't seen, and it's called Salvation. Viggo Mortensen was in this, actually. He was in a couple of David Cronenberg movies. I can't think of one to recommend you right now, but good actor. But he was in this. It must have been in one of his first films. So he was the only actor when I was looking it up on Wikipedia. Yeah, Viggo Mortensen was in this. Again, as I said, good actor in his own right. Almost at the end here. What do we got here? We're a little trip to Seattle. This is Singles. Original motion picture soundtrack. Not sure who the director was. Oh, Cameron Crowe. Yeah, Cameron Crowe's the director on this one. Excellent director. There's, you can see Matt Dillon right down there. And there's Bridget Fonda. This was set in 1991, 92 when this came out. Basically, he's a struggling musician. And Bridget Fonda is just an admirer. I haven't seen it for a long time. And Kira Sedgwick's in the movie as well. There she is right there. Mrs. Kevin Bacon. So this featured all these bands that were part of the new Seattle movement at the time. Of course, Alice in Chains, kick it all off with Wood. That was on an actual Alice in Chains. I think that was on their debut. There's a couple of tracks on here that aren't on albums. There's Chris Cornell solo doing a ballad called Seasons. He shows up here a few times. He's also on here doing a song called Birth Ritual with his band Soundgarden. Smashing Pumpkins are on this. Of course, they weren't from Seattle. They were from Chicago, but kind of fit into the same sound. Paul Westerberg's on this from The Replacements. That's a good song. It's called Waiting for Somebody. Again, Paul Westerberg, solo from The Replacements. And there's a version of the Led Zeppelin song. I'd be remiss if I don't mention that. It's called The Battle of Evermore. It's a cover here. And the band there is called The Lovemongers. Don't know much about them, but I do know that's a good version of The Battle of Evermore. Spit that out. So again, the movie Singles. Great movie. I had just graduated from university at the time, and I was really into a lot of these bands. And I actually saw a couple of these bands back right at the time. So yeah, I loved this movie when it came out. It was really cool, and I really like Matt Dillon. He just come off a Drugstore Cowboy before this. Was another movie he'd done. And yeah, great actor too, like Matt Dillon. And Bridget Fonda, she was great too in this movie. Actually, the daughter of Peter Fonda from Easy Rider. So I should mention that, Ty. Same Fonda family. All right, and another famous Canadian, that's Michael J. Fox. Bright Lights, Big City. This was sort of an autobiographical film. There was a writer in New York, society writer, music writer, a guy named Jay McKierney, if I'm saying that right. And this movie was kind of based on his antics at the time. So it was kind of wild, like lots of cocaine, strippers, just wild all-night parties in Manhattan. It totally screams 1980s. It was kind of funny, Michael J. Fox in this, because he had such a wholesome image. You know, the Back to the Future movie, he'd just done that. Of course, you know, he'd been on the sitcom Family Ties, of course. And then he does this, but he's really good in this movie. It's kind of, I'd almost call this dark comedy, but it was a good movie. So some of the music on this, there's a Donald Fagen original on here called Century's End, again from Steely Dan. I mentioned Donald Fagen earlier. Kiss and Tell, that's Brian Ferry. That's actually, I think that's from his Bête Noire album. True Faith, New Order I mentioned earlier. There they are right there. Another version, that's just a single version of that. And yeah, oh yeah, there is. Yeah, there it is. There's a Prince tune on here. This was only available on this soundtrack. It's called Good Love, performed by the late great Prince. And that's Bright Lights, Big City. Not sure the director of this movie. It doesn't matter, but if you ever see this pop up somewhere on one of your platforms, it's a good movie. Again, representative of the 80s, totally, all the way. Switching back a decade, this is representative of the 70s, and this is the last one I'll show today. This is Boogie Nights, one of my favorite filmmakers to this day, and he's still making movies. I just watched his new movie, and apparently Daniel Day-Lewis, it's his last. He says he's retiring. It's a film called Phantom Thread. It's really excellent. I won't tell you the whole plot. You'll have to look it up on Internet Movie Database, imdb.com. If you're not familiar, is a good source to look up any of these films. Paul Thomas Anderson collaborated a couple of times with Daniel Day-Lewis, but Daniel Day-Lewis was not in Boogie Nights. That would have been kind of comical if he was. But instead, Mark Wahlberg was the star in this movie. Burt Reynolds, yeah, among others. So this release date on this one, I want to say was, yeah, 1997. It's kind of cool on the inside. So this, of course, it's all a lot of disco stuff, you know, from that year. When the movie takes place, I want to say 78, 79. And you see on the inside here, of course, the Mark Wahlberg character in the film. It's Dirk Diggler. Of course, it's the whole plot of the film. It's about the porn industry at the time. Burt Reynolds is a producer, director, and yeah, it's great. This is one of Paul Thomas Anderson's first big breakthrough films. Of course, later on, as I said, he worked with Daniel Day-Lewis. There Will Be Blood is another one I'd highly recommend. Not going to go through the whole Paul Thomas Anderson catalog, but if you look him up as a director, his films are just incredible. Another one, Magnolia, as I mentioned, Tom Cruise earlier from Risky Business, a far more mature role in Magnolia than he had back in Risky Business when he was still a teenager. That's another one you could look up. So that's the last one I'm going to show today as far as soundtracks, and it's Boogie Nights, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, as I said, starring the late, great Burt Reynolds and Mark Wahlberg, among others. Too long a list to mention. So, yeah, Heather Graham was another one in this. And Julianne Moore, another one, great actress. So anyway, Boogie Nights. So that's the end of my movie soundtrack showcase today. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, all those movies are good. As I said at the beginning, there was a couple that aren't. But no, going through that list again, those are all movies I'd watch a second time. In fact, Heavy Metal might be the exception for that. I'm kind of a little beyond. The cartoon thing doesn't really work for me anymore, including The Wall. I don't care if I see The Wall again. Kind of done with that 2 or 3 times when I was younger, and that was fine. I still can appreciate the music, though, of course, of Pink Floyd and The Wall. Anyway, folks, hope you have a great weekend, and watch some movies along with listening to music. They go hand in glove. Have a good one.